All right, welcome to another episode of Can I Say Something? We're doing the backdrop now because the last week's episode was terrible, and we're talking about a really serious topic here, so we want to make sure that it's actually getting the right attention it deserves. So backdrop's not really a big thing, but we want to make it look nice here. Anyway, though, we're focusing on our guest at hand. We're talking to Amy Povah. She is the founder of the Clemency. She herself is a drug war victim, sentenced to 24 years, part of a conspiracy charge in an MDMA operation. Amy ended up serving 9 years before having her sentence commuted under President Clinton. Since then, she has been one of the most ardent advocates for getting nonviolent drug offenders out of prison across the country. Amy has really helped me out in helping getting this, the High Times Most Affected series off the ground, and along with Weldon Angeles and the Last Prison Project. Amy, I could go on and on about you, and I would love to dive into your work, but let's turn it over to you, who for the folks at home could get to know you a little better.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate you inviting me onto your show. Again, I love the title. It says it all, and very clever. And you have been instrumental in getting some exposure for several of the POP prisoners that are on the Can Do Foundation website into High Times, so thank you for that. I don't know if people can really understand or appreciate how someone who's sitting in a prison cell feels when you feel forgotten, and it really means a lot to them when we're able to give them any little bit of good news. And being told that you're going to be profiled, whether it's on a podcast or High Times or in any venue out here, really lifts up your day. It makes gives you a little bit of pep in your step, even though you're dealing with heinous conditions and probably one of the worst things that our society could think of happening to them, because when you go to prison, you're kind of hit the bottom of the totem pole of life. So thank you so much. And yeah, I would love to talk about this topic and how important it is for us to bring our cannabis prisoners home.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. I think, I like to say I'm just trying to do a little part in something big here. I think everyone gets swept up in, the excitement of legalization. And, I think a lot of business folks will end up talking about banking when in reality is the people that, whether they wanted to or not, that helped create this industry, thousands of them are still in prison and lives have been ruined. And, some folks can never get back their lives. They, either died or lost so many decades in the system, and it's affected families. So I think, it's telling the stories of these individuals and the folks that are truly the most affected by the war on drugs is, it's essential to my part of the job. So no thanks needed, but I appreciate it. And anytime we can get the stories told, I'm happy to do it. And, Amy, I think first off, telling your own story is just as important. You are an advocate now, and you've been out of the system, been out of prison for, a couple of decades now, but it doesn't change the fact that you yourself were in the position of the people that you're fighting for now. Can you kind of, just for the folks that don't really know, don't have to go too deep, but what was your experience like in the system? How did you get wrapped up into it, and what did it take to gain your freedom under the Clinton administration?
Yeah, well, I'll try to take a a decade-long story and condense it to a few minutes.
Sorry, I don't want to be rude by any means on it too. I know they're so complicated.
Yeah, it's just I really have to watch it, because before I know, I digress and I go down dark alleys and stuff, and then I realize, oh my gosh, I've been going rattling on for 15 minutes, but I was married, and I'm not trying to make it sound, there's no hidden agenda here by saying that he was a Stanford Law School graduate, other than to let people know, because so many people think that if you're caught up in drugs, you're probably sitting around in an apartment or a certain kind of environment, and there's drugs around you all the time, and how could you possibly not know everything that you were clearly in on this, and your husband didn't have a job. But in my situation, he owned several businesses. I worked for one of them. It was called Commonwealth Bank Corp. We did second mortgage swimming pool loans. So he got interested in MDMA when it was legal. And from what I understand, because I was shielded from knowing the big story, I'm not saying I was innocent. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion when you say you didn't know the whole picture, but you can know bits and pieces thanks to the conspiracy law. and get sucked into something where you don't really know the big picture of what's going on. And people who are doing something illegal usually don't want their spouses to know every little thing, especially if you have a contentious relationship. And from the time I married him at 25, it was somewhat rocky because he was had a problem with alcohol and infidelity. So that being said, within 3 years, I moved to Los Angeles. We were still married. I just needed to break free from a very controlling, manipulative person. We did ecstasy. I've tried ecstasy. I think it has medicinal qualities like cannabis. So I was in Los Angeles when he was arrested in Germany. And to make a very long story short, he wanted me to come see him and retain an attorney for him. And I still had feelings for him. So I did. Now I feel like that was a very foolish thing to do, but I didn't know about the conspiracy law or mandatory minimums or new laws that had just been passed. This was in '89. Jesus. So the feds busted into my home in the Hollywood Hills, threw me in the proverbial hot seat. I was not there. By the time I drove in, they had already been ransacking my home for hours, and they ran into the garage with their guns drawn, pointed at me, screaming, and pulled me out of the car. And I'm in shock. I mean, I actually even think I'm being robbed at first because this wasn't SWAT. They were in plain clothes.
Wow. So it just feels like a full ambush.
Yeah, obviously, and that I lived in the Hollywood Hills, and that had happened to a woman about a week or two prior to this. Anyway, so the next thing I know, there's this people screaming and hollering and telling me that I'm looking at 20 to life if I don't cooperate. And I had foolishly collected some illicit funds because my estranged husband thought he was going to get bail over in Germany. That didn't happen. And so for that, I was guilty. What I didn't know is that you can get, by doing one overt act, they call it, you are guilty for everything that everybody else does in a conspiracy. And back then, it was even all-encompassing. They've changed the laws since I was incarcerated so that they say from the day you entered the conspiracy, you can't be held responsible for things that happened prior to when you entered the conspiracy. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, I was dragged to Waco.
Not much of a change, even.
Yeah. I talked with an attorney, and he said, the laws have changed. You're in hot water. They want you to cooperate because they think you're a valuable asset that can be used to infiltrate his organization because he's over in Germany.
Right.
And I was just like, are you kidding me? And there was talk about maybe having to wear wires. And when you start cooperating, you don't get to dictate the terms. You have to do what they say. And then, and
it's all a slippery slope in and of itself.
So, and one of the reasons I share this about myself is because nearly every case that I'm assisting walked down the same path that I did. They're all people who went to trial. They're people who got the trial penalty phase. They're usually people who did not cooperate because those people get a reduction in sentence. And we focus on people who are generally serving 10 to life. Because they went to trial, and we no longer have a Sixth Amendment right to trial. And those are all the things that I have learned through experience that I wanted to carry forward because I went to Waco, a horrible venue. Never been to Waco in my life. But they were able to change the venue from Dallas to Waco because you only have, anyway, I think it's was a corrupt court. My judge is no longer on the bench because of sexual misconduct. So he got thrown off the bench with full pension, but
what a punishment.
And he gave me 24 years, and I was just really basically the wife of the person who was the so-called he was the ringleader. The ringleader, my estranged husband, cooperated and he came back to the US and got 3 years probation by the same judge that gave me 24 years. So he snitched everybody out, and you get fully rewarded. And the lesson in my story, and the reason I share it the way I do, is people need to understand, and prosecutors cannot say that we need these laws so that we can put the bad guys, that they used to justify it and say, well, we need to pressure the low-hanging fruit so they will help us get to the people at the top. I was one of the first cases when the drug war got resurrected by George Bush and Reagan, but primarily Bush. So I was at the front of the list of the way they really handle cases, which if you're a kingpin and you will talk, they don't care. They will give a deal to the most culpable and put the low-hanging fruit in prison. So that's why I like to share my story.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that works out, is it just because it's the easiest way to get to convict everyone? They'll take the kingpin. If they sell out everyone else, it's just an easy way to get everyone taken out. Is that the way it's approached?
Pretty much. There's a term now, first in, first out. So the
Mm.
first one to talk usually gets the best deal. People who have the most information are usually people at the top. And if they will sing and basically even turn on all the people they recruited to work within their organization, for lack of a better term, illegal enterprise, whatever you want to call it. So if they will rat out the very people that they brought in so they could make money, they get the best deal. And there's no better. I do know there were some people in our case, in this particular case, that imported lots of MDMA from Guatemala, et cetera, and they got full immunity. So they never served a day if they would just testify. So anyway, I served 9 years on a 24-year sentence, and I went all in because Clinton was from Arkansas, and I grew up in Arkansas. And when Glamour magazine focused on my story, two senators here in Arkansas, one of them was from my little bitty hometown of Charleston, where I actually happen to be in Charleston right now. I inherited my mother's home, and he was very close friends with President Clinton. And they tried to go through the normal channels. They met with the pardon attorney. The pardon attorney was not interested in my story in the least. And when Senator Pryor and Senator Bumpers went to talk with, at the time, Roger Adams, it was just a yawn festival. So they told me, we're going to take it straight to Clinton. And if that hadn't happened, I probably would have served all my time.
Wow. And again, like, even in a positive situation, it really is about through the networking and through like the system. It's not just on the merit of, hey, this person was nonviolent offender, did nothing of the sort really, other than taking in a little bit of money. And that's not the way they look at it in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And just so your listeners know, what I did would be a money laundering charge. And money laundering charges usually carry 5 years for what I did. And I actually, they pressured me for 2 years trying to get me to cooperate, and made my life a living hell. They harassed me, harassed my friends, followed me. They wouldn't indict me. But long story short, I sent a message through my attorney. I'm willing to give the money back. And the message came back to me that, no, we want money. We want to know where there's more MDMA, and we still want her to cooperate and help infiltrate this organization. And I was just like, well, just put a gun to my head now, because I can't do this. I just can't.
Isn't that the job of them? They're supposed to be doing, like, yeah.
Well, this is another thing that I don't know if your viewers know, because it's not something that the criminal justice reform community talks about a lot. But if you ever go back and we watch movies of the 70s and early 80s era, there were always undercover DEA agents. You never hear stories about undercover DEA agents anymore, because they seem to have gone to a model where, instead of having, and I have a friend who was a former undercover DEA agent. His name was Jack Cole, and I put him in my film 420, the documentary about cannabis, because he felt horrible about some of the things. He felt much remorse for having put some petty drug dealers in prison, and he has stories about becoming buddies with people and then being in their home and having them invite him to Thanksgiving and bouncing their children on his knee, all the while he's collecting information to betray them. Jesus. And you might be caught up in the moment of a trend, and most things in our nation are trends that get a lot of momentum behind them, the drug war being one of them. And you don't really know the damage that you're going to do to your soul when you are retired and sitting around and trying to justify what you did. So he was wonderful in helping me understand that, because he told me when I was interviewing him, he said, we never had drug raids gone bad back in my day. We didn't have these stories where they hit the wrong home, wrong address, and somebody gets killed, which there's a gazillion stories like that in the
far too
90s,
many.
clear up till the recently the black gal that happened to. And he said,
Yeah.
you know why? He said, because there were people in the employment of the DEA like myself, and we would have to go into the house and do no less than 2 buys. And that way, if the court threw out one because some typo or a warrant had some little glitch in it, then we had a second bite of the apple. And he said, now there really aren't undercover DEA agents. What they do is they catch somebody on the street with drugs, and then they pressure them to, where did you get the drugs? Now you have to work with us. So they're making citizens become the undercover DEA agents with no training, and sometimes they'll set up rivals or somebody who's innocent because they don't want to set up their buddies. And that's where the problem of the drug raids gone bad come from.
And it's just like, the same sort of effect as, the prison system. You if you don't play along, they're going to put you over the coals and make sure your life is over. Or in this case, if you do play along, your life could still be over from it. It's, they really don't make it a situation where you're actually trying to rehabilitate anyone that has supposedly done wrong or anything like that. It's just to get in the system, get them in, and go further. It seems like, put them to use. And it's really sad to see it, and it's unfortunate because like you said, the model's changed, but they've been doing the suppression for far too long, and even before cannabis criminalization, it's just ongoing, and we're trying to fight it. And I don't know. It's really difficult. And I think one of the big things you brought up earlier, and I talked to Anthony about this last week, and I think it's really important to get your perspective on it, is, the conspiracy charge. The conspiracy charge and the mandatory minimums really seem to be the two that, the 1-2 punch that really do people in. We were talking last week about Corvain Cooper, who was put away on a life charge for 3 nonviolent drug offenses, and, so many other people like that. Can you kind of talk about, from your own experience and just the folks you worked with, the dangers of the conspiracy charge and, the sort of situation that people get put in?
Right. Well, Corvain, just to stick on point, Corvain's story was just quite the nightmare in my view, because he had a wonderful attorney who stood by his side after he was incarcerated. Most people don't have that luxury because attorneys want money, and once the money's gone, go find a post-conviction attorney, and those, But I think his name was Patrick Magaro, and he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, because when California legalized cannabis, they said that they were going to expunge cannabis possession. And 2 of the 3 strikes for Corvain was cannabis possession. So the Supreme Court should have actually used that as a perfect opportunity and model to release Corvain, based on the fact that the law has changed. And you can't hold this man in prison any longer for 3 strikes because the 2 prior strikes don't count anymore. But of course, the Supreme Court took a big Pasadena and said, I think it's very rare to have them take a case. But that was a perfect opportunity. And I was devastated over that. But the conspiracy law and mandatory minimums became blackmail tools, and there's really nothing, you can't refer to them any other way. It's blackmail. Even in the 90s, when I was serving time, there was a judge that kind of opened the door, and every now and then this would happen, and it threatened to overthrow really nearly every drug case, because he ruled, I don't remember what, it was the appellate level. I don't remember what district it was now, but he likened them to blackmail. And he said, this is really blackmail, because you're forcing people to plead guilty based on this 20 to life expectation, where it's just most of the evidence is testimony. It's not hard facts. It's not tangible. And we're being put in prison on the word of somebody who's working themselves out of the system, you can't really rely on somebody who's looking at more time than you are. So
Right.
I'm helping so many people who, unlike Corvain, did not get clemency or compassionate release, and they're still in. And so Pedro, we call him Pete Marino, is one of those. He's out of, oh my gosh, like 7 or 8 people in Houston. 4 of them were his brothers. He was the 5th brother. Can you imagine being the mother of 5 sons and they all get life? And they pled guilty. They all pled guilty. And I know who his attorney was, and he's a pretty powerful, high dollar attorney. And when I heard, I was like, something's funny here, because you don't plead guilty and get life, especially if you have an attorney who should have the clout. And that's where I feel like these backroom deals kind of happen, or you give all of your money, people put their homes up and lose their homes trying to fight the feds in these cases that take literally hundreds of thousands of dollars if you do go to trial. But they even pled guilty and still got a life sentence. Who allows that to happen? So he's been in over 2 decades. His daughter just had a baby. He's a grandfather once again. And
I think Pedro's story is just one of so many that we've highlighted. I've talked to Alejandro for the article, and just the pain you hear from someone who has to deal with their parents and their family, and especially the Moreno family, like you said, with all the brothers all going away at the same time, and it really just destroys a whole family. Can you talk about?
Let me add that 4 of his brothers received clemency from Obama, and Pete was left behind. So was Ricardo, who married into the family, who was serving life. And he finally got compassionate release from the judge. So Pete's the last man standing. So we do have somebody who's doing a documentary short on the story, and we're hoping to get some eyes on it, because he's a first offense. It's his first offense. Everything about his case is so disturbing that he's still in. He's done everything right, and life sentence is something. For your viewers, a 24-year sentence was like an elephant on my chest. And sometimes there were days where you feel the pressure of that sentence, where it's hard to breathe. And I don't think people can really understand the magnitude when it comes to years. So people who were serving 2 years did their time much differently than people who had 24 years. Now, try to factor in somebody who has life with no parole. Having to carry that on your chest, the weight on your shoulders, is something that it's torture. It's really torture. There's no other word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking to so many folks on the phone, and honestly, sometimes they're not even allowed to speak on the phone. We can only communicate through email. It's just, you hear, they try to keep positive by just facing such daunting circumstances. Oftentimes I think, especially in federal cases, people don't realize that they don't get to be near their family. They're moved, often moved around the country. A lot of times people are like, yeah, I haven't seen my mom, my daughter, 7, 10, 12, 20 years. And, it's insane. And a lot of times, like you said, especially the lower hanging fruit, the people that didn't make any money from these things and didn't, pocket anything from it, and were just kind of involved in it, or not even involved in it, they don't have the means to go see these people, see their family, their loved ones, much less, afford a lawyer to help fight their case. It's like, they're just so far back behind the 8 ball on this. And, like you said, I can only imagine, like you said, that pressure on your chest, how do you even, fight at that point when you're facing such circumstances? How did you, get through it?
Yeah, well, the same is true of Pete. His family lives in Texas and he's out in California. Yeah. And when we passed the First Step Act, it put in there that people should be within 500 miles of their families, or even the home. I mean, he was prosecuted in Texas even.
Right.
Sometimes I was the flip side. I was prosecuted in Texas, but I lived in California.
Right.
So you need to be positioned near your family. But even in this, if they tried to say, well, you know, he was prosecuted in Texas, why is he in California? It just doesn't make any sense other than if you want to completely, you know, continue to add more unnecessary suffering heaped on
Yeah.
somebody.
Is there any rationale that they give when they say they're doing it, or is it just they're moving people?
I don't know. And he's even at a prison, Atwater, where they won't allow us to communicate via core links. I communicate with people in almost every institution in the nation. But Atwater, a long time ago, tried to pull this ploy that says you can only one prisoner can email one person. Multiple prisoners can't email the same person. Well, we're an organization,
Right.
and
You have to,
they
you'd have to
took
set up an
everybody
individual
off.
email for everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Sorry.
it's really hard for us to stay in touch with him because everybody else, we do a lot of one-on-one. We send in news updates. We keep everybody abreast of what's going on. Like I was in DC recently with Liz Oyer. She had a kind of a symposium where she brought a lot of clemency recipients and people who are working to help others in clemency to DC. And I was proud to be honored alongside Kimba as being two people that she said really have done the groundwork to help people come home through clemency after receiving clemency. So those are all things I want to share, but all I can do is really, you know, call his daughter Alex. And speaking of which, I really think that probably this is something that we maybe need to do a kind of a fundraiser or something like that. So Alex could go visit her father and he could meet his new, you know, his newest grandson and grandchildren.
Yeah, it's just so brutal, especially in that situation, that like we said, that there's one brother and two family members still left behind while everyone else is out, and just the heinous nature of it. And we could really dive into it for a long time, but I know we only got a few more minutes here, so I want to, we will do a part two anytime you want to talk about this because this is such a serious issue. But really the big issue I know a lot of people want to talk about is what's been going on with President Biden. I know there was a lot of pressure on the Obama administration, there was pressure growing on the Trump administration. We saw a little bit of incremental action happening, and then there was supposed to be a ton on the Biden side. We have heard a little bit of movement, with the one action, but in retrospect, it really didn't affect too many active cases from my understanding. Could you kind of recap the situation and what is currently going on?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm probably one of the last people who's going to cheer and give very many accolades to something that was optics. Seems to me that there was no substance when you have the power of the pen, and with a stroke of a pen, you could do what you promised you would do when you were on the campaign trail, wanting people to vote for you. And the cannabis community is a huge block of votes, massive, as you know. And yet you have chosen to do a somewhat of a kind of a token action of pardoning anyone with marijuana possession when marijuana possession is a state crime. It's not exactly a federal crime. And for the longest time, there wasn't even an application on the Office of the Pardon Attorney website for somebody to fill out if you were in the small category of people that might fall into federal possession, which would be citizens of DC. Every citizen of DC is a federal case in Washington, DC, or on federal land. We're still having a hard time casting a wide net trying to find anybody who actually benefits from this gesture.
It was pretty much like a few retroactive cases, pretty much, wasn't it? Like that was that was really all I heard. They said like up to a couple thousand were possibly affected by it, but I haven't heard many success stories from it.
Yeah, I'd love to actually put my eyes on somebody who benefited. Right. It's like I don't know how you even find them, but Weldon may have found one or two. I don't know, but yeah. I was asked, and we put out a call, via social media and through core links, which is the inmate way to email people, because we communicate with a lot of people in prison, and Again, I think it was, it was a gesture, it was optics, and it makes it sound like he did something for the cannabis community. But I'm sorry, it's not my job to, I'll work with whoever is in the Oval Office because it's prisoners over politics. I'm not really
Exactly.
a political person, and frankly, I'm not left or right. I'm pretty much moderate, but. I was recently at a conference. It was frankly a psychedelics conference, and I closed out my part of the panel, which was the last one for the day, saying that, we aren't getting represented, and we have to stop getting caught up in these partisan politics of, the left versus the right, because it's just a huge distraction, and we are not being represented. So you have to take a step back and really think about who you're going to support, who you're going to praise, who you're going to, because our voices should matter and they should count.
Absolutely. And, I'm not going to go into it right now, but I've got an article coming up on High Times about why neither of the parties or really should be trusted entirely on getting this done. Because I'm sorry, like, we talk about incremental progress, and sure, government should be incremental progress when it comes to, making laws and, figuring certain things out. But when the overwhelming support of the public wants something to happen, and we have thousands of lives being in affected by it, and millions actually being affected by it, if you look at all the families of the drug war victims, it's this incremental stuff really can't happen anymore. There needs to be some sort of past legislation. If you don't want to legalize adult use cannabis, fine, but like deschedule, reschedule, expunge records, pardon, there's a lot of things. Like you said, a lot of it can be done with the stroke of the pen. It's not like we have to pass a law here.
Yeah, cannabis was a essential business during a pandemic. So I remember being in prison. There was no such thing as a rave when I was first arrested. And so I know the feeling of sitting in prison, and then I'm looking at magazines, and all of a sudden I'm reading about raves. And at least raves were underground, but imagine serving life for 20 years, or we have a ton of people on our website, and you're watching 420 events, even before it was legalized. I mean,
Right.
before Colorado and Washington State legalized, I was filming for the documentary I did, because I was just shocked when I found out about the 420 events, and all the cops are standing, and the kids at Boulder are smoking, and also Santa Cruz and all this stuff. And I'm just like, okay, I'm sorry, but you can't juxtapose these two situations where somebody is serving life in prison and everybody is here smoking on this one day at this 1 hour, and it's tens of thousands of people, and the cops are like kind of celebrating. They're just kind of like, oh, chilling. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wait, which is it? We're not during the Harry Anslinger era, where reefer madness had parents brainwashed into thinking that their children might kill them with an axe in the middle of the night. This is a different era, and yet here we're stuck. We're just literally
Yeah.
we're completely in a holding pattern, just flying around looking for an airport to land while everybody on the plane is going to lose oxygen.
100%. Yeah. And, meanwhile, the biggest case that always frustrated me, especially, was hearing about like Luke Scarmazzo and, Ricardo, I believe is his business partner, escaping me. Apologies. Hell, they were up. Yeah, right on the wall. Yeah, we're going to talk about all the folks next on that too, because that we need to highlight them. But like, that's the thing. It's like, Luke and Ricardo were operating a legal shop. There's so many different nuances. And then, like you said, people are now seeing billion-dollar markets. They're seeing, lounges being open, and this is how it should be. There should be markets. There should be all this stuff open up, but free the people. Like, it's just, they want to stick the idea that, they were the offenders during the prohibition time and blah, blah, blah. But like, I thought we've already established that the prohibition time was unjust and unconstitutional and disparity ridden anyway. So there's no comprehension once you look at it pragmatically. I mean,
Right.
obviously, I'm stepping out of, oh, sorry, go on.
Well, Aaron Sandusky is an incredible case. There's, everybody should have a movie about their story, but they literally did set him up because the local community, and he was here in California, were trying to extort money from him. And he actually he did the right thing. He reported it to authorities. And so then he found himself in the crosshairs of retaliation by, I think it was a mayor of the community, who then decided to really target Aaron and set him up and sick the feds. on him, and there really just isn't anything. He was completely legit, but he did have one person that got into business with him who used to work for the DEA. How convenient is that? You know, you
Right.
have these I don't want to get off into conspiracy theories, but I've seen a lot of cases where you just wonder, okay, why was there the convenient informant that somehow saddles up with somebody? And I'm not trying to, Aaron has never said this, but so I would defer to Aaron. But suddenly you have somebody who you thought would be a good partner who flips like that and testifies against you. And you just wonder if that was the plan the whole time.
Yeah, and there's so many just situations like that. Like you said, like on pretty much every one of these stories could be told in a movie. You know, like I think of such varying ones. You know, Craig Cecil was running an HVAC operations and just retrofitting cars and happened to be retrofitting, you know, weed transporting trucks. Edwin Rubis was, you know, someone who was just dealing with addiction and struggling and just trying to, you know, make himself meet, and then now is serving life in prison and has taken every sort of certification and education and basically been a model, beyond model prisoner, just a model human, and still can't get set free. And, you know, it's just, you know, I think that's really the way that we should wrap this up here today, Amy. You know, obviously we want to do a part two, but like, let's talk about some of the folks you're working with. We've already just touched on a few of them, but who are some of the other folks that you're trying to get home, and, you know, what can the public do to help support you and their causes?
Yeah, I have several right here in my I've got my phone open. And Cornelius Berry, oh my gosh. None of us should judge a book by its cover, but you know, he's just a precious African American kid, just fresh faced, ready to go out and conquer the world. And he's serving 15 years for cannabis. We've got Tony Lupian Godines. He's serving 16 years. Joseph Akers, African-American, serving 16 and a half years. Daniel Longoria, first offense, serving 30 years. We've got Jason Gregg, first offense, 15 years. The Sentencing Commission just did a every year, or is it every 2 years, where they come up with suggestions for their guidelines. And one of their suggestions was to give first offenders a little bit of a break, like maybe a 2-point reduction or whatever. And I could not agree more, because I remember being in prison as a first offender. And if you can make it to especially your 30s, and you don't even have we're not talking your first federal offense. We're talking no hot checks. Didn't do it, you know, no warrant out for any petty thing. No, you don't have a criminal intent. You just don't have a criminal mind, because you've gone basically your entire life, done everything right. Mm-hmm. And then because of mandatory minimums, you're looking at, again, 10 to life for your first offense. No, we need a break for those people. And we have so many first offenders, but even some of them, their first offense was marijuana possession. I wouldn't even count that, you know?
Right. Yeah, I know, my home state, New Jersey, we have pretrial intervention for that to, you know, get rid of that charge.
Right.
So what can people do? First off, what can people do to learn more about the folks that you're helping out? Where should they visit? Should they go to Can-Do's website, or where should they reach out to you? How do you prefer to get in touch?
Well, to be clear, the name of our organization is the Can-Do Foundation. And I came up with Can-Do when I got out of prison, because I wanted to help the women I left behind. And Can-Do stands for Clemency for all nonviolent drug offenders. That's where the Can-Do comes from. I have the website is called Can-Do Clemency, because there was another Can-Do Foundation, so I couldn't get that one. So a lot of people call my organization Can-Do Clemency, because that's our website.com. And you can click around. We're in the process of creating a new website, because our other one needs a fresh update. And but you can click, and there's a section for cannabis prisoners, and they're all on there on that page. There's also a way to reach out to us if you want to, and we can pen pal people. If some people want to adopt a prisoner, we'll set you up with somebody. We like to kind of know the person, because before I had a guardian angel program, and I would try to pair people that might live fairly close to where they were, where the prison is. And I've had many people go in and visit somebody in prison who were guardian angels, and they're still best of friends, are like sisters. So we try to pair people that way, but also a lot of these people have change.org petitions that you can sign and share it. We need some energy around this. And I've been recently on some Zooms with Congress members where we're getting on these Zooms trying to talk to Congress members to get them to start pressuring President Biden to start using his clemency powers liberally.
Good. Yeah, that's what we need. And, that's one of the things I've always heard from lawmaker and advocate friends is, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's a cliche, but it's a true cliche. Once a week, send in a nice voice message, send in an email, letting them know about a prisoner or just the law in general really can help. It takes a while to do it, but a few people can make a difference in that case.
A few people brought me home. I mean, there's no doubt. I had a letter writing campaign, and we would find constituents in a certain district because some politicians will take the position that, well, Amy has to write to her senator or her congressman. So we started having constituents say, no, I'm contacting you because I want you to do this for me. I'm offended that Amy is serving 24 years. I knew Amy, or I've read all about her story, and I am your constituent, and I want you to do something because I'm your constituent. And it's hard now to get people to write letters, but there's other ways to communicate with the Office of the Pardon Attorney. They can send in an email, whether you're a politician or someone who's influential. And because it seems like politicians are concerned about whether you put their letter on social media, and then all their constituents are like, well, you wrote for so-and-so, why won't you write for my child? I think that's some of the pushback, but there's other ways to ask them to participate, to get involved, to do a coalition letter to the president and just merely add your name that you want clemency, especially for the cannabis prisoners. Why hasn't it been done yet? That's the big question. Why? Who's pushing back? Because if Biden wanted to do it, and if Kamala said we're going to do it if we get elected, who's standing in the way? Who is the obstruction?
People on the back end, possibly. That's probably. I'm not saying it, but maybe.
Probably only DOJ.
So really, you got to let your voice be heard. It's still a large uphill battle, but the more we actually chime in and, take it off of, not just social media, but take an action on it. And, I don't know, maybe just an idea, whether you support the right, support the left, maybe make sure your presidential candidate you're voting for in the primaries maybe supports these things. And then, as we found out from our last ones, maybe they're not going to go forward on it. So now we got to hold them to it afterwards. So it's, I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a different approach we all need to take as public.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
No, that's coming up campaign time again when they start
talking about this.
At the very least, I think some of it is just, who's my audience? What do I say to this audience? I'm going to pump this to this audience, then I'll pump this to that one. And sometimes it's a contradiction, but now we have an opportunity to hold feet to the fire, because it's like, well, you haven't honored your first promise. Why don't you do something now before election, the re-election time, or, and prove to us that you deserve our vote. So we'll see, but I don't know. I haven't heard that anything is in the pipeline before the election. Not that the White House talks to me, but they don't, but still, we kind of get little teeny rumblings and stuff. So
we'll see how those poll numbers are doing, and maybe there'll be some more action. Unfortunately, as much as we don't want it to be an optics move, that does seem to be it right now. But like we said, maybe we can start to make a change if we start holding our primary candidates to it, and then actually holding the president to it, whoever it may be, come 2024. Yeah, Amy, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking. Like I said, we could be discussing this for hours, and I know we have before, and I appreciate you taking time for the viewers here. Love to get you back in the future. Is there anything else on your mind that we need to share before we wrap this up here? And if not, just let us know where we should be following you and where we can keep in touch.
Well, a big hoo-ah for Donald Fugate, because he was serving for 15 years and he just came home, and I was very close with his mother. We tried to get him compassionate release. The judge and he even had he only had one lung, and he was there through the whole COVID, and he qualified completely for a compassionate release. And of all the people to say no to, a judge to say no to, because we had some very sketchy people with violent crimes coming out on compassionate release. Not saying they didn't deserve it, but my point is, with podcasts like yours, with people like you, and with your voice, if we can get the momentum going, I just encourage everybody to lean into this, lean into the cannabis prisoners. Let's not leave them out of the dialogue, like you said, when you're talking about banking or this or that. How about cannabis prisoners home first, and even a hashtag or whatever, but we cannot leave our soldiers out on the battlefield bleeding out. It's just not who we are, and that's what they're doing. They're literally just laying there on the battlefield, hoping that somebody will pick them up and let them go home and reunite with their families.
Absolutely. And, that's the thing is, we want to talk about free use. We want to talk about freedom of the plant. We got to talk about freedom of the people and the folks that got us here. Amy, I appreciate you for taking your time. Anything we can ever do for you, always hit me up. I'm going to be dropping some links in this episode, so be sure to drop visit the links for Amy and the drug war victims that have been released, as well as those that we're trying to get home. Amy, thank you so much. Appreciate everything you're doing, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Andrew. Have a good one.
Appreciate you. Thanks, you too. Thanks.